Most people believe getting rich requires a secret strategy, a lucky break, or connections in high places. But psychology research suggests something different. The gap between those who build wealth and those who don't often comes down to patterns of thinking that happen quietly, every single day, in moments that seem completely unremarkable. Welcome back. If this kind of content interests you, consider subscribing. There's real value in understanding how our minds work when it comes to money, and this channel explores that regularly. In 2026, the psychological barriers to wealth have never been more subtle and never been more powerful. Technology has created an environment where instant gratification is the default, where comparison is constant, and where financial decisions are more complex than ever before. Yet the fundamental psychology hasn't changed. Human behavior patterns around money remain remarkably consistent, even as the world around us transforms. This analysis examines the psychological mechanisms that separate wealth builders from everyone else, not through dramatic stories or success formulas, but through observed patterns of human behavior that research continues to validate. What follows is an exploration of how people think, choose, and act when it comes to money, and why those patterns matter more than most realize. There's a famous experiment from the 1960s involving children, marshmallows, and the ability to wait. Researchers told young children they could eat one marshmallow immediately, or wait 15 minutes and receive two. Follow-up studies tracked these children for decades. The ones who waited showed better life outcomes across multiple measures, including financial stability. In 2026, that same psychological mechanism plays out differently but just as powerfully. The modern economy is engineered for immediate satisfaction. One-click purchasing, same-day delivery, instant approval credit, streaming everything on demand. The neural pathways that reward waiting have to fight against systems specifically designed to trigger dopamine release right now. Psychology research indicates that people who accumulate wealth tend to exhibit a specific pattern. They feel the same impulses everyone else feels, but they've developed what researchers call metacognition around those impulses. They notice the urge to spend. They recognize it. And then they create space between the urge and the action. Consider a common workplace scenario. Someone receives a promotion and a salary increase. Two patterns typically emerge. The first person immediately upgrades their lifestyle. Nicer apartment, better car, more expensive restaurants. The raise disappears into elevated baseline expenses. The second person maintains their lifestyle and directs the increase toward investments or business development. 5 years later, the financial gap between these two people is substantial, yet the initial circumstance was identical. The difference isn't knowledge. Both people understand that investing builds wealth. The difference is in the automatic response to having more money. One pattern treats increased income as permission to increase spending. The other treats it as an opportunity to increase the gap between income and expenses. What's particularly interesting is that this isn't about deprivation. Research on sustained behavior change suggests that people who build wealth don't typically feel they're sacrificing. They've often shifted what triggers their reward response. The delayed gratification becomes its own source of satisfaction. Watching investments grow, seeing options multiply, feeling the security of reserves. These create their own dopamine response, one that compounds rather than depletes. The average person in 2026 has access to more financial information than existed in entire libraries a generation ago. Investment strategies, market analysis, business opportunities, skill development paths. It's all available, often for free, updated constantly. Psychology research has identified a counterintuitive pattern. More information often leads to less action. It's called analysis paralysis, and it's particularly pronounced in financial decision-making because the stakes feel high and the variables feel infinite. People often fall into a specific loop. They research investment options. They find conflicting advice. They research more. They discover complexity they didn't know existed. They feel less confident than when they started. They decide they need to learn more before acting. Months pass, sometimes years. The research continues, but the account balance doesn't change. This pattern appears repeatedly in career transitions as well. Someone has a skill that's marketable. They could start a side business or transition to higher-paying work. But first, they tell themselves they need to be sure. They need more knowledge, more preparation, more certainty. The planning phase extends indefinitely while the opportunity window slowly closes. What's observed among people who move forward financially is not that they have more information or more certainty. They have a different relationship with incomplete information. They seem to operate with what researchers call good enough decision-making. They gather sufficient information, not perfect information, and then they act while maintaining flexibility to adjust. There's a man who worked in corporate marketing for years. He had skills in digital advertising that freelance clients would pay well for. He researched freelancing for 18 months. He read books, joined forums, compared platforms, analyzed tax implications. His research was thorough and his planning was detailed. But he never sent a single proposal to a potential client. A colleague with less expertise but more tolerance for uncertainty started freelancing with minimal preparation. Within 6 months, the colleague was earning more from side work than from the full-time job, learning through direct experience what no amount of research could have taught. The psychology here is about the function that research serves. For some people, research is preparation for action. For others, research becomes a sophisticated form of avoidance, a way to feel productive while avoiding the discomfort of actual risk. Human beings are social creatures, and our sense of what's normal is powerfully shaped by the people around us. In 2026, around us has expanded to include hundreds or thousands of people we observe through social media, each carefully curating their visible lifestyle. Research in behavioral economics shows that people don't evaluate their financial situation in absolute terms. They evaluate it relative to their reference group. The comparison determines satisfaction more than the actual numbers. This creates a peculiar trap. Someone earns a solid income, enough to save and invest significantly. But their social circle, their Instagram feed, their neighborhood, all display a certain lifestyle. Vacations to specific destinations, cars of a certain class, homes with particular features, restaurants at a specific price point. The psychological pressure to match this visible consumption is substantial, even when unspoken. What's particularly insidious is that the comparison is usually with people's spending, not their net worth. The person driving the luxury car might have substantial debt. The couple posting from expensive resorts might have no retirement savings. But those facts are invisible. The consumption is visible, and that's what triggers the comparative response. Studies tracking spending patterns show a clear correlation. As people earn more and move into higher-income social circles, their savings rate often doesn't increase proportionally because their spending rises to match their new reference group. It's called lifestyle inflation, and it's one of the most common patterns preventing wealth accumulation among high earners. There's a fascinating contrast in how different people handle this psychology. Some manage it by consciously choosing reference groups that prioritize building assets over displaying status. They spend time with people who talk about investment returns rather than purchases, who value financial independence over impressive appearances. Their comparison instinct still operates, but it pushes them toward wealth-building behaviors rather than wealth-displaying behaviors. Others create deliberate separation between their social life and their financial choices. They participate in the lifestyle of their peer group to a point, but they maintain clear boundaries. They attend some expensive dinners, but not all of them. They take some impressive trips, but not every year. They drive a car that's acceptable but not optimal by their group's standards. This requires active resistance to psychological pressure, and research suggests it's cognitively demanding. The point isn't that displaying wealth is inherently problematic. The point is that human psychology makes it difficult to build wealth while simultaneously trying to appear wealthy, because the two goals often conflict directly, and the appearance is usually what drains the resources that could become actual wealth. Psychologists have identified a consistent pattern in how humans respond to potential gains and losses. The pain of losing something is psychologically more intense than the pleasure of gaining something of equal value. This isn't a personality trait. It's a fundamental feature of how human brains process risk. In 2026, this shows up constantly in financial decisions, often in subtle ways that people don't consciously recognize. Someone stays in a job they've outgrown because leaving feels like risking security, even though staying means accepting the certainty of limited growth. The potential loss feels more real than the potential gain. Or consider someone with a stable income and a business idea they believe could work. The risk is real. The business might fail. But the risk of not trying, the opportunity cost, the forever wondering, the years of earning less than they could have, that risk is somehow less psychologically vivid. The potential loss from trying feels immediate and concrete. The loss from not trying feels abstract and distant. Research in decision-making shows that people who build significant wealth tend to have a more calibrated relationship with risk. They're not reckless. They often calculate risk quite carefully, but they seem to weigh potential losses and potential gains more evenly. The fear of loss doesn't dominate their decision-making to the point of paralysis. There's a pattern observed in people who successfully diversify their income. They don't quit their stable job impulsively. They often start something on the side while maintaining security. They test, they validate, they build gradually. But the key is they actually do these things rather than endlessly considering them. They feel the fear of potential loss, but they don't let it become a veto on action. What's interesting is that risk tolerance isn't really the right framework. It's not that wealth builders are more comfortable with risk. Often they're quite risk-aware. The difference is in what registers as risky. To them, staying in a limiting situation for years starts to feel like the bigger risk. Not developing additional income streams starts to feel dangerous. The risk calculus shifts. This connects to something researchers call prospect theory. People are generally willing to take risks to avoid losses, but become risk-averse when thinking about gains. Someone might stay in a declining situation longer than rational analysis would suggest, because accepting the loss feels intolerable. Meanwhile, they won't take reasonable action toward gains because any potential loss looms too large. The psychology of regret also plays a role. Research indicates that people regret actions more in the short term, but regret inactions more in the long term. The person who starts a business and fails feels acute regret immediately. But decades later, people more often regret the chances they didn't take, the businesses they didn't start, the risks they didn't accept when they had the chance. There's a mathematical principle that's psychologically difficult for humans to grasp intuitively: exponential growth. Small percentages compounding over time create results that seem disproportionate to the inputs. A 1% daily improvement doesn't feel significant. Over a year, it compounds to nearly 38 times improvement. The math is clear, but the psychology fights against it. This shows up in wealth building in dozens of small decisions that individually seem inconsequential. The daily coffee shop visit at $7. The subscription services that auto-renew unnoticed. The convenient food delivery instead of the groceries already in the kitchen. Each decision is small. Each makes minimal difference in the moment. Research on financial behavior shows that people systematically underestimate the long-term impact of small recurring expenses and systematically underestimate the long-term impact of small recurring investments. Both errors work in the same direction: against wealth accumulation. Consider someone who spends $15 daily on convenience purchases that aren't particularly necessary. That's roughly $450 monthly, $5,400 annually. Over 30 years, if invested with modest returns, that represents hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the psychological experience of that $15 today feels nothing like the psychological experience of hundreds of thousands in the future. The immediate convenience is tangible. The compound effect is abstract. What's observed in people who build wealth isn't that they never spend on convenience or never treat themselves. It's that they seem to maintain awareness of the pattern. They notice when small decisions become automatic. They periodically audit their subscriptions, their habits, their recurring expenses. They maintain what psychologists call intentionality around money flow. There's a related pattern around income. Small increases in earning capacity compound similarly to investments. Someone who deliberately develops skills that increase their market value by 10% annually doesn't just earn 10% more. Over a career, the compounding effect of higher base salaries, better opportunities, and accumulated expertise creates exponential rather than linear growth. But this requires consistent small actions. Reading relevant material regularly, taking on challenging projects, building relationships in valuable networks, developing expertise that others need. Each action is small. The compound effect is dramatic. The psychology that enables this consistency seems related to identity rather than motivation. Motivation fluctuates. People who rely on motivation to maintain beneficial patterns experience boom and bust cycles. They're disciplined for a while, then they're not. Then they restart. The pattern is exhausting and rarely produces compound effects. People who consistently make small beneficial decisions seem to have integrated those decisions into their sense of self. They're someone who invests regularly, rather than someone trying to invest more. They're someone who develops their skills, rather than someone who should probably learn more. The behavior flows from identity, rather than requiring constant willpower. Psychologists researching financial behavior have identified something they call money scripts, unconscious beliefs about money formed early in life that continue to influence behavior decades later. These aren't rational conclusions. They're deep associations formed through observation and experience, often before age 10. Someone grows up in a household where money is scarce and every financial decision is stressful. They might internalize, "Money is always a source of anxiety," or "Wanting money is selfish," or "We're not the kind of people who have money." These beliefs operate below conscious awareness, but they shape financial decisions continuously. Research indicates that people often unconsciously sabotage their own financial progress when that progress conflicts with their internalized identity. Someone achieves success that moves them beyond their family's economic status. Instead of feeling purely positive, they experience guilt, anxiety, or a sense of not deserving it. They might unconsciously make decisions that bring them back to a more familiar financial level. This shows up in fascinating ways. Someone gets a significant raise but feels uncomfortable with it. They find ways to spend it quickly, not through conscious choice but through a series of reasonable decisions that somehow always drain available resources. Someone builds a successful business but then makes inexplicable decisions that undermine it, often describing it as bad luck when the pattern suggests something more systematic. What's particularly interesting is salary negotiation avoidance. Research shows that many people, even high performers, experience significant discomfort advocating for higher compensation. The discomfort isn't about the conversation itself. It's deeper. It's about claiming that they're worth more, that they deserve more, that they're the kind of person who commands higher pay. If that conflicts with internalized beliefs, the psychological resistance is substantial. People who move beyond their original financial circumstances often describe having to consciously rebuild their relationship with money. They notice the automatic thoughts that arise around spending, saving, investing, earning. They recognize patterns they absorbed rather than chose. They deliberately develop new associations, new beliefs, new identities around financial capacity. This isn't about positive thinking or affirmations. It's about honest examination of unconscious patterns and deliberate practice of different behaviors until those behaviors become natural. Someone who grew up believing rich people are greedy might need to find examples of wealthy people using resources generously before they can comfortably build wealth themselves. Someone who internalized money isn't important might need to reframe wealth as a tool for freedom and options, rather than as an end in itself. The psychology here suggests that financial success isn't just about knowledge or strategy. It's about whether your unconscious identity permits that success, whether your deep beliefs about yourself and money allow you to take and sustain wealth-building actions. The patterns examined here aren't secrets. Most people have heard about delayed gratification, about avoiding lifestyle inflation, about the power of compound growth. Yet knowing and doing remain profoundly different things, because psychology operates largely beneath conscious awareness. What separates people who build wealth from people who don't isn't usually access to information. It's not intelligence. It's not even opportunity, though opportunity certainly matters. Often, the separation comes down to psychological patterns operating quietly in everyday moments. How someone responds to having more money, how they handle uncertainty, how they relate to their reference group, how they process risk, how their unconscious beliefs about money and self-worth interact with financial decisions. The question worth considering isn't whether you know these patterns. The question is whether you recognize them operating in your own life, in your own choices, in the gap between what you know you could do and what you actually do when it comes to money. Psychology suggests that awareness itself, honest awareness of your own patterns, is often the first step toward different outcomes. Not because awareness magically changes behavior, but because it creates the possibility of choosing differently in the small moments that compound over time into dramatically different financial realities. If this analysis resonated with you, consider leaving a comment sharing which psychological pattern you recognize most in your own experience. These discussions often reveal insights that individual analysis misses. And if you found value here, subscribing ensures you don't miss future explorations of human behavior and decision-making. Thanks for watching.